Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum and Ramzan Kareem to all of you. We are delighted to have you with us this morning. I know it's morning in a good chunk of Canada and afternoon on the East Coast. So we are here to exchange some really good information about storytelling. This is our sixth in our series of Delete Digital Hate Conversation series. The series aimed to combat the surge of hate crimes in Canada, especially online hate and extremism. And the series focused on empowering Canadian Muslim women, girls, and non-binary individuals to address online harms targeted at them. What we do in the series is focus on online and digital hate, misinformation and disinformation, and how we can counter these effectively. So with that, I'm really delighted that you've joined us today for our sixth in the series. And today's event is going to be focusing on storytelling, empowering women digitally. And you'll hear more about our speakers in a few minutes. So let's begin with the land acknowledgement now. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the peoples of Turtle Island. The sacred land on which I'm addressing you from today has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. I acknowledge the land that I'm at is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I acknowledge that Toronto or Takaronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, the meeting place of Takaronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. As Canadian Muslim women, we recognize a connection between anti-Indigenous racism and Islamophobia, and we are committed to working toward justice for Indigenous women and girls across the country. And I know that it's become sort of routine to do these land acknowledgements, but they would have no meaning unless we take a few minutes and think about where we are. Many of us are settlers in this land, and it is a gift of the Indigenous peoples that we are here, that we're reaping the benefits of this land, and its waters and food that we are blessed with. So if it weren't for that, if it weren't for them in allowing us to be here, we would not be able to survive. So it must be that not only do we acknowledge this land, but we acknowledge the blessings from the indigenous peoples of this country. Next slide, please. So today we're going to be hearing from two amazing speakers, Dr. Sana Patel and Rehab Mohammed Patel, and they will be addressing the topic of storytelling, empowering women digitally. And you will be introduced to them momentarily. But right now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for the program. Our moderator is Fatima Sayed, who is a Mississauga-based journalist with the Narwhal, an online publication that offers in-depth coverage of environmental and energy issues across Canada. She has worked and written for many publications, including the Toronto Star, National Observer, The Guardian, and Chatelaine. She's the Vice President of the Canadian Association of Journalists. She was winner of the 2022 World Press Freedom Canada Award. Welcome, Fatima.
Thank you so much, Nazat. Happy to be back and continuing this important conversation that we've been having with TCMW about hate and all its facets, how it plays out, how it affects us on a community and individual level, and solutions, what we can do about it with platforms and also within our communities. I'm really excited about today's conversation. It's it feels really joyous, even though it's tied to online hate, because it's about creative solutions to a very, very dark problem. To sort of unpack all of that, I'm joined by two speakers, Dr. Sana Patel, who is a PhD specialist in digital Islam. She spent over 6 years studying Muslims and religious authority on the internet. Her research interests include studying digital religion, religious diversity, religious authority, religion and immigration, Islamophobia, and non-religion. She's published various things on Islamic authority online and across North America. I'm also joined by Rehab Mohammed Patel, who is a PhD student in sociology at Carleton University. She has a master's in fashion from Toronto Metropolitan University, and her research interests are on Islamophobia, Muslim futurism, which she'll tell us what that is, fashion and art as storytelling tools. Her project, Khawab, has been published in the Fashion Studies Journal and is planned to be part of a larger installation in collaboration with the Mipsters exhibitions in the United States and Canada. And she'll tell us a little bit more about what that is. Thank you both for being with me today. I guess I'll start with Sana. Can you tell us a little bit about this term, digital Islamophobia? What is it, and how does it impact Muslim women?
Sure. I'll start off by talking about digital Islam and then how it gets to digital Islamophobia. So basically, anything and everything that happens in the cyberspace world that has to do with Islam and Muslims is digital Islam. So this includes going on websites to read the Quran, or looking up Islamic information, looking for Islamic texts like the Hadith online on the internet, um, researching Islamic information, say going on like fatwa websites to look for Islamic legal rulings, even discussing Islamic matters or things that have to do with Muslims online in social media, so on social media platforms, or following or liking some religious authority figures or Muslim vloggers. It's all a part of digital Islam. Now, unfortunately, because the cyberspace, internet, social media, all of this is unregulated, this makes space, it makes room for Islamophobia, it makes room for hate. Because the internet is where people can be anonymous, hate prevails, and we know this. So this is digital Islamophobia, anything anti-Muslim, anything that promotes hate and spreads hate about Muslims and misinformation about Muslims counts for digital Islamophobia.
That's so interesting. I've never sort of heard that term used like that before. And I wonder, Rehab, is that how you understand it as well? Before you even started your research, is that sort of the premise that started your work?
Yeah, well, as you know, we're sisters, so I would always hear her feedback or just conversations while we're driving. So it did, like, I think unconsciously influence me of how I understood digital Islam and digital Islamophobia.
I know you had some slides, Sana. Would it be helpful to put those up right now as we unpack it a little further?
Sure.
Um, one of the concerns we have is we don't necessarily think of like I think for most people Islamophobia is a specific kind of action. But as you talked about, it's very widespread. So maybe you can walk us through some examples of what you've seen that would count as digital Islamophobia. And
Sure.
I want to give a trigger warning. Like this might be a little hard to sort of hear and look at, but it's important to understand what we're dealing with before we get into the solutions part of the conversation.
Yeah, if we can go back to the previous slide, I would like to start off with that. And again, I'm really sorry if you hear my bird in the background. She's just a little unwell today, so she's been calling for me. So apologies for that. But hopefully she won't be loud. So I hope that's okay. So I'd like to start off just by bringing up this report on Islamophobia. This was released last November by the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights in Canada. So they conducted this study by talking to people in the Muslim communities in BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. And this report was released to validate the experiences of Muslims that show how prevalent Islamophobia actually is in Canadian society. So this report found that, there were more than 3,000 hate websites and social media groups that individuals in Canada were operating, and how they were spreading hate and spreading misinformation and promoting hate against Muslims. So they found that yes, Islamophobia does happen in Canada, but also in digital spaces that impacts Canadian Muslims. They also found that the frequency of hate speech and the misinformation on social media platforms that almost all of us use, like Facebook or X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, there was common concern for witnesses, people who would see these hate comments or see this information about Muslims that was untruthful, that promoted violence against Muslims or just discrimination against Muslims. And actually, this is what I found in my doctoral research as well. So I defended my doctoral thesis just last year. And many of the people, actually, I spoke to 50 people. So many of the people that I spoke to said they avoided going online, or when they went online to just look for something lighthearted, look for, something fun, they actually encountered Islamophobia. They would see, posts about Muslims or comments about Muslims, again, spreading hate against Muslims. So they would just avoid going online. And this is a part of digital Islamophobia, how this is impacting the lives of Muslims, not only when they're online, but how they use the internet, and how Islamophobia online is kind of transferred into their offline lives. And, we've seen that through hate crimes and violence against Muslims that has happened, especially in the last couple of years here in Canada. I would like to give some examples of digital Islamophobia as well. So if we move to the next slide. Yes, perfect. So digital Islamophobia has many forms of Islamophobia through digital, right? So I would kind of like to talk about memes because we see that very often. So what are memes? Memes are kind of like pictures or posts on social media. And for those who don't or who haven't seen any memes, I'm sure many of us have, but they're a popular form of like pictures that show stories, or they're supposed to be kind of funny, or they have some kind of like comments on them that people can share, that people can relate to. Most of the times, this includes like humor, or maybe some kind of ironic message, or something funny to convey a message. Um, Also, for memes, when it comes to digital Islamophobia, well, these memes are spreading misinformation about Muslims. They're promoting hate against Muslims, and memes are often used to kind of normalize practices and push back against criticism. So if something happens, something in the news, then memes can be made. So the examples that I have thought of are the first one I have up there is the Danish TV comments for Family of Monkeys. So when the World Cup was happening, there was in 2022, a Danish TV channel made these really offensive comments about the Moroccan Muslim players and how they celebrated winning one of the games, and how they refer to them as a family of monkeys. So a lot of people online, they took it to social media to kind of not only kind of encourage that and make pictures like we see on the slide, but also people were concerned about how the internet is allowing that, how social media allows, this kind of Islamophobia and this kind of just discrimination against people who are Muslim. And this was just unacceptable. It's problematic. So for the Moroccan players, and because most of them, they were Muslim, and how they celebrated by doing the sajda, by prostrating, because they won. It's a fundamental practice for Muslims to kind of go into sujood or like practice however they want to, but bringing in the Muslimness is what made it Islamophobia. And then doing it online in the media made it digital Islamophobia. So the comments about this, it opened up discussions on how people view Muslims, how people look at Muslim identities, and how Muslims actually face microaggressions and also discrimination through memes like this. There's also another example through Remove Kebab. And this was, I believe this was back, actually, this actually goes back to the 90s. So what happened was the hashtag remove kebab. It's been used to villainize and dehumanize Muslims. So this hashtag was used to advocate for the genocide of Muslims and validate violence against Muslims in the West. It was used by the far right. It actually originates from the genocide of Bosnian Muslims and Croatians, where over 8,000 people were killed and many of them were displaced. So, this hashtag, it was all over, formerly known as Twitter, when it was Twitter, before it was X. So it was used to kind of just hate on Muslims, hate on Muslim immigrants. So this happened in the European context. However, because it was online, people are all around the world were able to kind of participate in it and spread hate and spread misinformation about Muslims. There was also another meme for Sharia Barbie. This is when, sorry about my bird on my head. I'm not sure if you can see her, but she's up there. um, yeah, so there was also the Sharia Barbie. I do have the picture of Sharia Barbie, but I will show it later on. This is when Barbie came out with a Barbie for the Olympic fence player, Ittihaj Mohammed. So during the Olympic times, they came out with a Barbie, and however, trolls online or haters online, they took this picture of Barbie and they portrayed Barbie as a victim of violence while her hijab is on. So that kind of shows us, how Muslims are racialized, how there's Orientalist perspectives of Muslims, and basically that is how online hate is spread. I'm sorry if I went on for too long, but there's just
Oh,
so
that
much
was
going
great.
on with these examples that I feel like we don't have enough time to unpack, and unfortunately, this is the reality for us.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought up these examples. I remember all of these examples. I think oftentimes we don't get a chance to actually reflect on them. I'm really glad you unpacked them, and I think you should unblur your background so we can enjoy them there we go. Um, it's so interesting because memes are such a memes are almost a progression in terms of the way Islamophobia has communicated, right? If you think about the evolution of hate, which makes it sound so scientific and awful, but it's no longer just like slurs said to you in person or online in words, but now it's becoming more creative. Like, it is illustrations, it is art, meet text, it is messaging through the visuals. And I know there's a lot of people now trying to use similar creativity to combat it. So maybe Rehab, talk to us a little bit about your research and how you're trying to flip this narrative almost in a visual way.
Yeah, for sure. So when I started my master's, I originally thought like, oh, I wanted to look at Muslim women on social media, right? Like, what are they doing? We see like modest influencers, we see the average person. So first, I was curious to see that, but unfortunately, during my master's, uh, there was the London van attack against the Afzal family, and I think that really put into perspective of like how important clothing is when it comes to visibility and identity as Muslims. So someone who's wearing shalwar kameez or someone who's wearing the hijab, all of a sudden it's associated with being or looking Muslim, quote unquote. Um, but when I did go through my interviews with my participants, we really uncovered that their dressing practices were a form of storytelling. It kind of not only advocated for themselves, but like it became an expression of who they are, and it changed depending on the locations they were going. So I know we use like the terminology of storytelling. So just to kind of define it out for everyone, as we know, what is storytelling? You can pick up a book and you're reading a story, you get the plot, you get a bunch of details, but it's also a new way of knowing and learning. And it is cross-cultural. So being able to use storytelling as a tool to communicate, like it is a universal language, but it also uses elements to convey like narratives, ideas, emotions, and experiences. But it can also take many different forms, including like oral traditions passed through generations, literature, performances, music, and digital media in this case. I think most importantly, it does allow us to connect to our past, our present, and our future. I do want to add a little bit more on how storytelling has been used in media when it comes to Muslim women. As many of you, I don't know if you guys have remembered, but in 2021, the French Senate voted in favor of banning children from wearing the hijab, as well as preventing mothers who wear the hijab to accompany their children to schools. So this caused a movement on social media called Hands Off My Hijab, which was to take on control of Islamophobic narrative and transform it into resistance. I just kind of want to touch on like the idea of fashion. I know when I at least tell people, oh, I did a master's in fashion, they're thinking about like Bella Hadid, high fashion. I'm like, no, no, yeah, sure. But like in this context, I want to talk about Muslim women. I want to talk about dressing practices. Fashion studies is such a complex field that like it is very inclusive, and something I said throughout my master's was like, although we can use fashion to celebrate, but it's also important to acknowledge that it can be very traumatic as well for women all around the world, right? Like depend it sorry, it ties in with their agency of what they're allowed to wear, what they're not allowed to wear, whether it's accompanying their true identity or not. So there is a lot of leeway in that as well. So connecting that back to Hands Off My Hijab, I thought that was a great example of how Muslim women who wore the hijab in many different ways to kind of take control of the narrative of like, let us choose when we want to wear it, and when we don't want to wear it, we shouldn't have like the government kind of controlling that narrative for us. So I thought that was one of the great examples that we saw, like digitalizing Islam in that sense of using social movements, using their hijab, using the hashtag Hands Off My Hijab on their hands to showcase that as well.
It's so interesting because I haven't thought about it as in the way that you just described it, which is, so often when you think about, the movements across the world to ban the hijab or to ban the niqab or to regulate just what Muslim women wear in various spaces, you think about it as, a woman's right to choose what she wants to wear and what she wants to adorn herself with. But it is more than that. It is deeper than that. It is a form of expression that is being limited. It is almost a visual, you know, emblematic way for us to represent ourselves and our identities and so forth that is being limited. And I wonder, I'm putting you on the spot right now, Rehab, but a lot of this is happening in the sports world, particularly. Like we're seeing a lot of female art athletes be limited in what they can wear, and that sort of limits their participation. And do you see that link getting more and more pronounced where digital Islamophobia against Muslim women who look a certain way or dress a certain way is limiting their ability to be more functional in society the way that they want to be?
Yeah. So I want to note, see, like 9/11 happened when I was 3 years old. So I was raised in a post 9/11 society, right? So all the Islamophobia that I encountered, it was like that's just how it was. Like I've never seen the pre part of it, right? But in the last couple of years, I noticed that like there was a change. There was a lot more conversations about inclusion, especially like peak 2020, as they called it, the racial reckoning was happening. So it's like, yes, DEI, let's include Muslim women, let's include like the visible aspects of these intersectional identities. And then in the last just couple of months, I'll say, the NCCM released a statement in, I think, October, that there has been a 1,300% increase in anti-Muslim and anti-Arab sentiments, right? So that even meant like people who looked Muslim. So if you I want to use, for example, 6ixBuzz as an example. Okay, like if you're on Instagram, if you're on Twitter, you see how they're informally communicating the like news to us, because like we can't access news on Instagram anymore in Canada, right? But the comments, like you'll see like the anti-Muslim sentiments kind of coming up. It's peeking through. So it's like, did it really go away, or was it just hidden, or was it very covert? Because when I worked at a beauty retail spot in Yorkville, Toronto, I thought like Toronto is a multicultural city, right? That's all we know. But like when I went into work, I would have people be like, so like I had a coworker tell me to come into work without a hijab. And like he's just like, no, I don't mean it in that way. I just mean like I want to see your beautiful hair. But it's like you are not obligated to see any part of my body without my consent, right? Consent is also a very important part of the agency conversation. Like you mentioned, for Muslim athletes as well. They're not giving you consent to see like whether it's their arms, their legs. They are consenting to be an athlete and play the sport, right? So it's also the conversation about like why is consent understandable when it comes to, you know, the physical aspects, but when it comes to visibility, and especially when it's centered around Muslim women, there is a little bit more of hesitancy of like, but is it what's it called? Like, could we change it when it comes to Canadian society? Because Canadian society is a very specific way, right?
Yeah, and Sana, maybe you can jump in here because I'm thinking about how like the impact this all has, right? Like the idea that the visual creates such a visceral reaction from society, um, can take a toll on you. Like I know many people who decided, you know, who used to wear the hijab and now no longer wear the hijab just for safety concern or just because they were tired of dealing with that kind of reaction. And I wondered what your research and what your studies have shown about the impacts of all of this.
Yeah, so online hate can cause for Muslims to live in fear because of these possibilities of online threats of becoming real in real life, in their offline lives. So for I've been thinking about, Muslim women and how this kind of impacts Muslim women when we look at these threats, when we look at what people are saying about Muslim women online, how it's really impacting us in our everyday lives when we are not really online. The hate against us, it's made more apparent, and especially for Muslim women who are visibly Muslim. So the visible identity markers like wearing the hijab or the niqab, and all of this is to kind of say it's made going on social media, using the internet, it's made it more difficult for Muslim women, especially visible Muslim women who have, say their pictures up on their social media profile where they are wearing a hijab. They're never going to experience social media how someone who's not a visible Muslim will experience. So these kind of impacts of digital Islamophobia, they're not all online. They're obviously offline, right? So taking the burden of dealing with Islamophobia online, bringing it into their everyday offline lives, and seeing how real these threats are, and how Muslims can get killed through massacres, like the New Zealand Christchurch mosque shooting, the Quebec mosque shooting, Rahab mentioned the Upson family in London. These are all real threats, and people who we know that these perpetrators of Islamophobia who were involved in these kind of violent crimes against Muslims, they were influenced or had connections to anti-Muslim hate groups or xenophobia online groups. So all of this actually goes back to just roots of hate, but also how the online world has made it so accessible and how there's such an unregulated, limited space of online hate. So from studies and living through and experiencing Islamophobia, we know that online hate and anti-Muslim sentiments on against Muslims online and offline, they're publicized through media, through social media, and it already adds to the existing tensions that people have, and it gives more reason for people to hate on Muslims, especially Muslim women, you know. It creates hate, it creates hostility, built up both in online and offline spaces, and they actually reinforce each other, and that is problematic.
That's so interesting. Let's talk about some creative solutions for all of this and sort of figure out how we can combat some of it. So if the haters are using memes, what are we using? And Rahab, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your project to start. Like it's called Muslim Futurism, right? And it's fashion, art, and using fashion and art as storytelling tools to combat this narrative. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so my project is called Khwab, and in Urdu, the word Khwab means to dream. The inspiration of the title really came from my mom calling me a dreamer when I'd be talking to her. I'm like, oh my God, look at these like big ideas. And she'd be like, okay, you're still going to do your PhD, right? And then you can dream about all this later. So I was like, wait, this project does kind of embody that. So Muslim futurism is a concept that is inspired by Afrofuturism. The Mipsters, they are an arts and culture collective based in NYC. So post of my master's, beginning of my PhD, I decided to reach out to them and be like, okay, you guys amplify original work. I have an idea. The concept of Muslim futurism is super cool to me, but I don't understand it completely. Can we do a project together? So to conceptualize Muslim futurism for you a little bit, the way I've conceptualized it in the last year is it's an emerging social movement that uses art and fashion as a modes of identity formation and self-expression as a way of resisting rampant Islamophobia. But it's also an analytic concept that signals identities not as fixed in the past traditions, but also active and a dynamic force of creating Muslim identities beyond the constraints and not limited to hegemonic oppressive realities of settler colonialism, Islamophobia, Orientalism, and anti-Black racism. So in a way, Muslim futurism is really a way to imagine a future in which Muslims can embrace multiple identities, where the Muslim diaspora could flourish and lead joyous lives away from Islamophobia and other oppressive realities. But the good thing is, because it's such a new concept, we can mold it in the way that we feel is important. I used to feel I still feel very confident and like joyous talking about Muslim futurism, where like we think about the future, we think about what could be when we aren't around our four walls. But in the last couple of months, especially with the genocide against Palestinians, I think it really positions us in understanding our privilege of thinking about the future, especially when it comes of like beyond oppressive realities, right? Like for me to sit and be like, I want to think about a fictional world, I think it builds on my own trauma. But to see people around the world suffering through colonialism, through capitalism, we also need to kind of take a step back and think about how we could use Muslim futurism to really examine that. But I'll kind of step back and relate the concept of Muslim futurism directly to the project Khwab. So Khwab is actually a multifaceted photo series. So it uses pretty much everyday Muslim women. So we had 5 participants, and we look at their alter egos pretty much. Because right now in the media, if you go ahead and search like Muslim women in media, you get 2 extremes. You either the way the media represents like, hey, look, this is a liberal Muslim, they assimilate to our society so much more compared to someone who's more conservative and they don't really fit in with our society, for example. But the idea was Khwab was, what if we could imagine ourselves and fit into the world of fictional storytelling, and we could imagine ourselves to be anything? So the photo that you see here is Arooj. She is a actor. She has a 9-to-5 job, but her alter ego is a time traveling detective, right? So what she said to me was, the reason this alter ego exists is, she's like, I can't be a detective in real life because one, she's like, I'm 5 feet and I'm a hijabi brown woman. She's like, I would be in situations that would be unsafe for me. But she's like, if my alter ego, like no one's really looking at her religious identity. We have more photos available on the website for Mipster/Schwab. Another example I want to use was my alter ego was an anti-hero, right? So I wear a mask with my hijab. So the joke that I make is if you saw a hijabi woman wearing a mask going around beating up bad guys, could we imagine the news headlines, what she would be labeled as? And in a way, it kind of took inspiration from my mom who wears the niqab. She decided to wear the niqab at the age of 58, and she decided, like, you know what, this is for me. And then during that time, I remember I had this fear for her, this secondary trauma, like fear of Islamophobia before it even happens, of like, I see the way the news are portraying women who wear the niqab, the titles, the labels that are getting. I'm fearful for my mother to experience Islamophobia. But then that's where I took inspiration of like, okay, why is it okay for like Batman to wear a mask and it's like he's a white guy doing it? Oh my God, this is like revolutionary. But when we change the racial and the religious aspects of it, so I kind of to summarize everything, I think Muslim futurism, we could use it as an analytic concept to think about it in our academic and learning spaces of what it means to be truly free and to be lead joyous lives. But it is again like a social movement. It is kind of resisting against what we've been already taught. And most importantly, it kind of teaches us joy. It, like, for me, come on, thinking about my alter ego, I want all of you guys to think about your alter ego. Who would it be? It kind of puts a smile on your face because you're like, oh, it sounds silly, but it only sounds silly because we were taught for it to be silly.
It's the idea of challenging the perception, right? That visual idea that just because a Muslim woman looks a certain way doesn't mean that she is limited or that she is less than or that she is constrained in some way. It's like a visual sort of challenge of that, which I love, and I can't wait to see more photos. And now I would like to know Sana's alter ego and also
Sure. I mean, I don't think I'm that creative to think about alter egos, but Rahab does have me thinking about that a lot, especially given, her WAP project and then how it's been releasing here and there. She's been writing a lot about it and discussing it a lot with me. But that kind of brings me to other ways where we can kind of counter Islamophobia and digital hate. So, we talked about today how memes and how there's space online for hate to prevail, hate against Muslims. But the online world also brings us positive things. I mean, just look at this virtual meeting right now that we're having. We're discussing digital Islamophobia and, what it is, how everyone should be informed. So cyberspace, it also offers spaces for supportive communities like CCMW. Also, so virtual events and then also humor through memes. So memes don't always have to be bad. If we can just move to the next slide where I have example of the Barbie meme, that would be great. So the Ibtihaj Barbie was shown as, a Barbie as for a victim of hate and violence. However, people took that meme and they were like, okay, let's show a different side. So there was a trend where people countered Islamophobia through premiering Greta Gerwig's Barbie, where the meme went viral, where people were emphasizing the position of Barbie's success in comparison to their Ken. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how Malala posted on social media, how she posted herself as a Barbie with her husband, taking a part in this trend to kind of show, misconceptions of Muslim women, which are usually rooted in misogyny and patriarchy. But there's been many studies on that, and there's a lot of proof over that as well. But in the corner, you can see the meme for Sharia Barbie, and you see how misconceptions and how Muslim women are portrayed negatively as being, victims of oppression, victims of violence for a Muslim woman who is wearing a hijab. But then we have memes and we have people like Malala who are, showing the other side, showing the real side of Muslims and combating the negative portrayals of Muslim women.
Also, shout out to the Muslim Ken in this photo, right? I feel like a lot of attention goes to Malala, but even challenging the idea that a Muslim man isn't sort of stereotypical, just because he has a beard or dresses a certain way or speaks a certain way doesn't mean that he's constrained or limited by that he can be Ken, that he can be like supportive and engaging and loving and all of those things that the world sometimes doesn't associate with Muslim men, right?
Yeah, that's a great observation. You know, a Muslim man who's not violent, a Muslim man who's not oppressing his wife. Wow.
Shocker, that exists. This has been so fascinating. One thing I'm wondering is both of you have done such amazing research into this and looking really at like the visual components of digital Islamophobia. How has it impacted your own interactions with the world? Has it sort of changed the way that you function in society or the way that you talk about digital Islamophobia in the world?
Well, for me, I first of all, when I started my master's, when I did my PhD, I just wanted to study Muslims. I wanted to study Muslims my age. Hey, what are they doing? Where are they getting their Islamic information from? But as we know, in reality, there's just so much Islamophobia that it's hard to avoid the topic of Islamophobia. So anyone that I interviewed, anyone that I talked to about being Muslim in Canada or in our neighboring country in the States, they had all experienced Islamophobia. So as I dug deeper into the world of Islamophobia, okay, sure, there are microaggressions. I can ignore that, at my part-time retail jobs, things that my dad has gone through or my mom has gone through, but I cannot avoid being a Muslim. I cannot avoid how I look. I decided to wear my hijab and it's my Muslim identity marker, and I'm going to have to deal with these things. But the reality of studying Islamophobia, trying to counter Islamophobia, it's very depressing. I think about why we're hated, why we're victims of violence and discrimination, just because we choose to believe in something that's not harming others. About my relationship with God, people have a problem with that. I'm looked at a certain way. I have to, deal with these Islamophobes and women who do not have the same privilege as me that can go out and speak on this, that can actually study this. It's a sad reality, but I'm so glad, there are positives like the meeting we're having right now and talking about this. And, my mom, like Rahab said, she wears a niqab, so she has a total different experience than I do. And I don't wear my hijab the traditional way. So I have a different experience for someone who does wear the hijab the traditional way. And it's just a lot of thinking, and it's something that I cannot unthink of. It's always on my mind. And it's just the reality of being a Muslim, I guess.
Yes.
Rahab, do you want to jump in? Because you're sort of modernizing such an ancient technique, which is storytelling, right? Like, how do we visualize our world and our lives? And has that changed your approach to society or to the topic as well?
Yeah, so I know I talked a lot about my master's, but I'm a PhD student, so let me bring a little bit of that research into you. But in this conversation, honestly, when I started like thinking about a project that I wanted to do, I was like, listen, Muslim futurism is so cool. Like, I want to do it. I was seeking a supervisor. So everyone's like, that's cool, but like, we know nothing about it. So like, we can't really help you. And then I started digging deeper into like, okay, how can I talk about Muslims experiencing joy instead of just writing, hi, my research is on Muslims and joy. And then I started thinking about art. So a lot of my research actually shows that there's very limited literature around Muslims in art. More specifically, when you like go on your library database or if you Google Muslims in art, you'll find traditional forms of art, for example, calligraphy, poetry, and other forms of literature. But um, I think art in general is being transformed into something so much more inclusive, especially the artistic practices, because it encapsulates various experiences. And we can see that through digitalizing it. We see storytellers who use digital art. You see storytellers who make documentaries. They might be actors. They're using the media available to them to counter these misconceptions. So for me as well, like, I started wearing the hijab when I was 13. And then when I started getting, I worked a retail job, I decided to wear it like the way Sana is wearing it. And then more recently, I started hearing people say like, oh, like wearing it that way looks really nice. And it would be coming from like non-Muslims saying it. And I think it kind of like a little bit of rage in me. And I was like, okay, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to pit what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in that sense. And so I'm like, you know what, like I'm going to incorporate it, my hijab, in the way that I feel most confident about. And then I'm like, sometimes on my Instagram or on Twitter, like I'll have like, oh my God, I love your fashion. Like you're using colors. Yeah, I don't see that often. I'm like, yeah, but like what makes me Muslim is my Muslim belief. And like we're gonna just like end it there. Everything else is like the extra bit. But yeah, like just seeing the world around me of like how many Muslim artists there are, and they're all around us. It took me so long to be like, yes, I'm an artist, because I felt like that was a very elite term for me to use, that I didn't fit under the narrative. But I just want to highlight, if we go to the next slide, some Muslim women storytellers, and like they've really revolutionized in the GTA, I want to say, what it means to tell stories in different ways. We have Nemesis, and I think her name's been misspelled there because of autocorrect. I'm sorry. But she's a Palestinian singer, and she's gone viral on TikTok. More recently, she's actually gone viral for her cover of, I believe, a popular song, and it was depicting the horrors that are happening in Gaza right now. And that was such a unique way to encapsulate and engage with the audience on TikTok, right? Like she's talking, like she's singing, and the meaning behind the lyrics to what's happening in real life. Other spaces I want to highlight is the Muslim International Film Festival. I think it's a phenomenal space in Toronto that honestly has allowed Muslims to feel comfortable in presenting their own stories, their experiences, without feeling like it doesn't belong, or that we are being tolerated in these spaces, but instead they're being celebrated. And then for Yasmin Khanji, she is a director. She has founded Films with a Cause. And then we have Timaj as well, who is a singer, poet, and arts educator. And I think just to take a moment to realize like these are all artists who are using digital forms, but they're really building on their own lived experiences as well to be advocates. So as their artists, it almost becomes a part of our job to also be like activists to what's happening around the world, how we can communicate these large, complex ideas of Islamophobia, for example, to the average and general audience as well.
Yeah, and those are just like Toronto based. If we sort of expand the pool, there's so many more Muslim artists who are doing so many cool things and changing the way like Muslims are perceived. And that's so important, right? Like I think, we talk about it almost in broad terms sometimes, that the way to combat online hate is to actually take up space in these in people's minds about how they perceive it and challenge a lot of that. And I think it takes time, as you spoke about with Muslim futurism, right? Like the idea is to slowly permeate people's thought processes and understandings of what Muslim people are, and how they exist, and challenge the idea that they don't fit in a box. So it's really cool what you're both doing, and I thank you so much for sharing some of those ideas and research with us. I do want to open it up to questions and discussion among the audience. We've got pretty robust crowd. So if you have any things you want to share or questions you want to ask our panelists, you can raise your hand or you can drop your question in the chat and I can ask on your behalf, whatever you're comfortable with. But we'd love to hear from you if you have that. Otherwise, you'll just keep hearing me ask questions, which I have no shortage of, but it's always nice to expand. So let me know. Let me know what you're thinking. One thing wanted to get your thoughts on while people are sort of thinking about this is, Rihab, you talked about how, you know, these singers and these artists and directors are relying on their Muslim identity to create the art that they're creating, right? And tell the stories that they're creating. But there's still a lot of tension, right, in the visual space. Like you still see people who are sort of co-opting Muslimness for whatever reason, right? Like I'm thinking about, say, the movie Dune, for example, and a lot of people saying like, well, that kind of exists in the Arab Muslim space, and you know, are they sort of using that and challenging or sort of making that stereotype more prevalent, right? That this is how Muslims are. Or like during that press conference, one of the actresses wore what looked like a white abaya, for example, and everyone was like, what's going on here? Like if a Muslim woman wears it, you think that it's a bad thing, but here's a white actress wearing it and it's not an issue. It's called beautiful and so forth. And I wondered if you both could speak about that tension and whether there's a way for us to navigate that.
I want to just quickly add there are a lot of people who are like, we don't need Muslim representation. We just need to uplift authentic voices. So if I'm going in and writing a story specifically and being like, I want to represent Muslims, but as we know, Muslims, the Muslim identity is so unique. Like, I'll give an example of me and my sister. We grew up in the same household, but our identities are far from alike, right? Our beliefs are completely different, especially the way we conceptualize spirituality and our Muslimness and how we view the world, for example, as well. So for someone to be like, this story, this movie, for example, is a representation of Muslims, it is very heavy-handed because like no two people are alike. Your example of Dune as well, and I think it just goes back to the idea of Orientalism, right? Of what they think Muslims look like, but how we can just wash them out and include it in our narratives. Grey's Anatomy had a it's a great show, but they had a Muslim intern, and at one point she had to take off her hijab to like help a dying patient. And I remember I posted it on my Instagram, and a lot of the feedback was like we were laughing at it because she's in a hospital and the only thing she could have found was like to take off her, and it's humanizing the Muslim woman in this narrative. And I think we need to kind of step back from why is there a need to humanize these people, like Muslim women and Muslims in general, but why can't we just accept that they're a part of our society? And I think it's the othering by pushing these narratives as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Rahab. And I'll just kind of comment that yes, we know that there are these negative representations of Muslims in movies. So therefore, positive representations are important because, it helps us to challenge stereotypes that are reinforced. It promotes the understanding of Muslim communities. However, what about the diversity of Muslims, right? There's not only one type of Muslim. There's not just one way of practicing Islam, right? There's lived Islam. So how people choose to do their Islamic practices, how they choose to do Islamic rituals. Religious authority. I research a lot on religious authority. I've written a lot on it. So religious authority might mean something to one Muslim, while it doesn't mean anything to another person. And then that kind of just shows us how diverse really Muslims are. They come in all shapes and sizes. So when it comes to these representations of Muslims in the media, who are representing Muslims? Who's written this role of this Muslim character, and how Muslim is that? Who is it for, is it for us to decide if this character is Muslim enough, it's not Muslim enough? And with the whole Dune thing, whether they are copying Muslims, as people are saying on TikTok and whatnot, I really don't know. But hasn't it always been the case when it's Muslims, it's always something negative? But when someone does something that looks like Islam, but it's not Islam, then it's okay. So there's a lot to think about there.
Along that vein, there are questions in the chat. You know, one of the things we talked about in these series is we always think of online hate as coming from like an external community or someone who's not within our community, right? It's someone non-Muslim or not, looking the way that we look. But oftentimes hate comes within our community. Like we're thinking of the Haram police or the Haram bros on Instagram and TikTok who are so quick to comment on what you're wearing or how you're acting and or how you're speaking and so forth. Um, what does your research tell you about that, Sana? Like how do we curb some of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how we can curb that, but I mean it's everywhere. Wherever, there's Muslim spaces, there is going to be haram police. I'm sure there's people out there who are watching this or will watch this and tell me that my hijab is not a proper hijab. I'm not covering my neck, I'm not covering the sides of my face, my hair is out, so it's not really a proper hijab. I'm sure they're out there, but in times of rising Islamophobia, like we have talked about the post 9/11 society, should we really be critiquing our own community members? Of course, there are intra-religious conflicts, right? This is the right way to pray. You cannot pray like this. This invalidates your fast. This does not invalidate your fast. But right now, we really need to just unite together. All Muslims need to talk about Ummah, just being one global Muslim community. This is exactly when we need to do it. It doesn't matter whether someone's Sunni or Shia or whatever their Islamic belief is, however they choose to do things. And that's really problematic because we really need to unite and combat Islamophobia and, kind of fight against these perpetrators of Islamophobia and tell them it's not okay. There are different types of Muslims, but you cannot hate on us. You cannot discriminate against Muslims in the workplace, out on the streets. We really have bigger things to worry about than how someone's wearing their hijab or how Muslim women should dress. And don't even get me started about the policing of Muslim women's bodies, burkinis, bikinis, I don't know, wearing skirts and wearing pants. Please, okay? Let's not get to that. But the haram police and the Muslim bros, come on, man. We have other things to worry about.
I would just like to quickly add one thing for that. Um, I actually give a guest lecture at a Carleton course for Islam, and what I was guest lecturing was like popular culture, and I brought in the concept of Muslim futurism. I showed these portraits. I showed this analog called Alhamdu, right? So they use elements of music, fashion, and culture, all of that. It was like I think like a 5-6 minute video. The division of reactions was like absolutely crazy. I had people in class literally be like, that's not what Muslims are. I had few students, literally male students, walk out and be like, no, that's not what Muslims are. You're changing the identity. Okay, so I'm like, okay, before I go any further, I have a question. Tell me who a Muslim is. Oh, well, I can't. Okay, there you go. That you just answered your own question, right? And I think that is the basis of it. I'm in the big grand scheme of things, they're not going to look at Muslims as being like, you're Shia, okay, you're Sunni, so I'm going to like hate crime against a Shia person compared to a Sunni. That's not how things are. Islamophobia is the fear of Muslims and those who look Muslim as well. So it affects us all. And I know we talked about visibility as well of Muslim women who wear the hijab and some don't. I feel like my master's research did kind of pull on that as well about the need to showcase their Muslimness for Muslim women. Like, even though I don't wear the hijab, I feel like I have to prove that I'm Muslim or I'm not included in these conversations surrounding Muslim women and gendered Islamophobia because I don't look a certain way. But in like the end, as we know, gendered Islamophobia is, again, for someone who looks Muslim, even if they're not wearing a hijab, it has elements of racism in there as well. So it could target brown women, Black women with anti-Black racism in there as well. And I think that's just something we constantly have to acknowledge, that it is so complex that our Muslim identity in the end, like if with the Haram police, for example, trust me, I'm on social media, we see those comments everywhere. It's like, what is your purpose? In a way, I feel like you're a troll. It's not like, oh, I'm giving advice, but like, for what? Right? In the end, like, what is this? Is this your need to feel like you've accomplished something? Is it a form of shaming as well when it comes to like, you don't look how we think Muslims should look like, coming from a Muslim as well?
That's so interesting because sometimes I get hate as in like, oh, you're not even Muslim because you don't wear the hijab, or you're not even Muslim because you wear jeans and so forth. There's actually no winning from the haram police. I think they're gonna hate on you no matter what. Unfortunately, I wish there was a solution for this. And I know there's like a lot of like I love the discussion going on about internalized, community hate, and I hope we've touched on some of that. Um, you know, we talked earlier about joy and how there are ways to bring joy into this space and allowing joy to curb some of the hate. And Sidra Khan brings up an interesting point that maybe we need more support groups so that we could actually like come up with creative solutions and so forth. And I wondered, I know you're both working on individual projects, but are there any collaborative efforts that you've seen, any creative collaborative efforts perhaps that are working? And then I see there's two hands up and I'll get to them, I promise.
I need a minute to think.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it as well, but I can't pinpoint any specific ones, but I know like the Muslim communities online and organizations like CCMW, they have been having like virtual iftars in Ramzan right now, and just workshops or other seminars to discuss Islamophobia and kind of educate people about the diversity of Muslims. And this is exactly what's needed to combat Islamophobia. We need to educate people about Muslims and Muslims within our own Muslim community. Let's talk about things that matter. We're getting discriminated against. Muslims are getting killed. Why? For being Muslims. So those are the things we should be talking about and worried about rather than like hijabs and who looks Muslim, who doesn't look Muslim, and just advice that no one really asked for, especially when it comes to Muslim women.
I think falls under agency, right? Like our choose the thing. And the best answer I have as a Muslim saying it to another Muslim is like, listen, God's not gonna judge me on what you think, right? He's not gonna judge us as a community. It's very individual. And like part of our core Islamic beliefs is that. So like you can leave it to me to do what I think on my decisions. But when it comes to joy, I wanna reflect on two things. One is with NCCM. Last summer, we decided that I wanted to do a project called Everyday Muslims. I wanted to capture Muslim joy, just the average person who exists, who finds joy in the everyday. And something that we came across is existing is resistance, right? Just going for a walk as a Muslim, we're already resisting what we are being tolerated against, for example. But also, just being able to connect to a community is joy, to feel like you're belonging. And I am very proud to say that, like, for example, the GTA, we have so many spaces that you can find somebody that you can connect with, whether it's spiritually, whether it's culturally. But I think what makes our Muslim identity so unique is the fact that we can build on our cultural practices, right? Like if I'm Pakistani and Indian, then I meet someone who is Indian. It's like, wait, well, it doesn't relate to me completely, even though I am also Indian, right? If I have a Somali friend, for example, like I feel familiarity with me, and then we get to feel safe within one another's presence as well. And I think that is very joyous, where you can grieve together, but you can also heal together by finding these communities. I think CCMW, for example, is a great example of that, being able to talk about these very harsh and like harsh and hard topics, but also knowing that it's a space where we can heal together, that you can meet people who have different opinions, but we learn at the same time.
That's so beautifully said. Akib, did you have a question? You dropped your hand, so I'm just checking.
I do. I can wait for a moment, be the second one or the
No,
third.
you're good. Please.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for doing this event. I don't want to accidentally go into mansplaining, but like I guess the main topic that I'm just gonna try and throw out within 2 minutes is that it's not a coincidence that the first chat messages the series, even up to right now, within the last 6 or 7, is what about us? What about within ourselves amongst the Muslim communities, those that are discriminating? And that's the sad part about having online connections, when I was so happy to see social media, specifically subreddits, that we're talking about Muslim cultures and trying to answer questions amongst Muslims. You just see all this hate, all this like easy, simplistic like readiness to demean and subhumanize. And it was different from 2023 when I got into it and I was allowed to comment, because now I'm banned from it. But when I was commenting, I was the only one who was going like, listen, you got to be sincere about the LGBTQ plus journey and their possibilities of being Muslim. Like there's just piety amongst them, and they gave me access to being a better human. So that's how I learned. But then you talk to these online profiles that have this clear level of lineage of hate and readiness to disqualify such a thing, and then they put in the hadith quotations and then the Quran, and then you go like, oh, okay, so my scripture that built us as a civilization, they adamantly hated these types of marginalizations. And then you look at these quotes, and you if you just have the level-headedness of a society that's plural, you go like, Allah created these abstracts to give people these different journeys and the ability to have the test of being good, but then they have different kinds of backgrounds of differences that we might not be comfortable with, which is what Allah is also saying, that you might not be comfortable, but at least build it onto your own mental capacity, And so even their quotes that they're trying to gear in these comments towards hate, it's diminishing, but that's because they interpreted it incorrectly, right? So I guess the main point that I want to bring to you is, when are we going to redefine Islamophobia as also these bigoted amongst Muslims who are also perpetuating Islamophobia? It's obvious you've met somebody who's Muslim and they're just ready to be anti-Semitic or anti-Black or anti-minority, right? Or ready to be supremacist, right? So that kind of concern is necessary to broaden the scope of Islamophobia, to then modernize our readiness to cooperate with each other. And I just do want to appreciate that y'all are highlighting fashion and customization, because that's not easy to. And I'll end it here, but that's not easy to kind of get validation of, because we don't have that kind of conversation. You're not going to meet somebody who's speaking like me, unfortunately. I think we got so much anxiety amongst men that we're more programmed to what we're conditioned with. And unfortunately, what we're conditioned with, because you talk about you being Pakistani, meeting a Somalian, meeting an Indian. I'm Bengali. All these countries that are highly Muslim dominant are built from oppressors, male oppressors, who kept these discriminatory laws going, these discriminatory patterns. So it's important to stop the Islamophobia amongst non-Muslim, but Muslims are causing this, and the online verse is difficult because we also have to add the demographic, the user persona of fake accounts who are just posing as Muslims, the ones that can write the Quran ayats and hadiths, and then we're assuming that this is a conversation from a Muslim. So yeah, so all that put together, like how plausible do you think is the scope of rebroadening Islamophobia to modernize it? The way I'm perceiving it, maybe you're going to perceive it different after hearing it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for participating, Akib. Maybe Sana, you can take that one to start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Akib, for your comments, your questions. It really kind of gets us thinking that when we're in these situations and someone's going to bring us a hadith or something from the Quran and tells us, well, this is what the Quran says, therefore what you are doing is wrong, and what I think that this verse in the Quran means is right. It comes down to interpretation. It comes down to religious authority, right? Who has the authority? Who is given the authority? Who is kind of translating that ayah from the Quran? Where did this hadith come from? You know, what about the story behind the hadith? What is the context? So there's just so many interpretations. Like one ayah, one hadith can have multiple interpretations. So there's always going to be diversity when it comes to Islamic texts, when it comes to understanding of Islamic matters, you know, whether it has to do with queer Muslims or it has to do with anything really to do with Muslims, there's always going to be that diversity of interpretation and understanding. And I'm kind of glad you kind of mentioned, you know, like Reddit. So Reddit, I feel like is a special social media platform on its own. There is just so much hate on there and just weird stuff on Reddit. I kind of avoid going on the subreddit Islam because I find the users are kind of dominated by one perspective there. However, this is when we can take things into our own hands. So when we encounter situations like that, we can encourage an open dialogue, right? We can start educating people about the diversity within Islam. We don't have to argue. No, no, you're wrong. Actually, this hadith is, you know, a weak hadith. What about this hadith? We really have to talk about diversity, how people can, you know, understand, interpret, translate things differently. And we really have to engage each other in, of course, you know, a peaceful way. And I know there are like trolls out there, so it's kind of hard to do sometimes, but they can, you know, just get ignored. But we really have to be like peaceful. We have to talk about our shared values, and then we have to talk about people who are marginalized. And again, just talk about the diversity of interpretations. That's what I've been thinking about recently, and I think that's one way to encounter hate and trolls, and especially those who come from our own Muslim community, unfortunately.
To go back to Keith's question though, do you think that the definition of Islamophobia should be expanded to, because again, maybe it does exist. Maybe the definition of Islamophobia does include the fact that it can come from anywhere, but I think it's perceived from coming from everywhere but the Muslim community. So do you think that needs to be challenged and incorporated somehow?
I mean, we commonly understand Islamophobia as the hate for Muslims, discrimination against Muslims, and the misinformation about Muslims. So it can include Muslims. When we are saying that there's only one way to practice Islam, there is only one way to do an Islamic ritual, we're already spreading misinformation about Muslims because there's not one ideal Muslim. There's not a Muslim shouldn't just look one way. So in a way that is kind of Islamophobia already, because the definition of Islamophobia is hate against Muslims and spreading misinformation about Muslims. So I guess in that way, intra-Muslim conflicts can also be included in that. And I feel like that's especially the case in Western countries or non-Muslim majority countries. Because if you go to the Middle East, where there are these Muslim majority countries, I feel like they don't even know what Islamophobia is, from my experience. When I've talked to people in the Middle East, and when I meet somebody in the Middle East, and I tell them I study Islamophobia, what is that? What do you mean the hate against Muslims? Oh, you mean like back in Canada, back in America? Because we don't do that here. However, it is there from our intra-Muslim conflicts.
I was gonna say the
Right.
concept of inter-religious conflict might be a better um, concept to talk about this when it comes to, like, you know, the religious community itself. In terms of Islamophobia, it's, when I think about it from like a community perspective, I don't know if it would, again, this is not a definite answer, but would it be like the fear of Muslims? So do we include like, oh, the fear of queer Muslims? So then am I Islamophobic against like a queer Muslim, for example? But I think I I like standing back and thinking what my mom has always told me, that again, if I'm talking to another Muslim person and we talk about like this level of Muslimness, right? It's like, in the end, like God says that even if you have like a rice piece of faith, like you are Muslim, like that. And in the end, like if I do end up saying that, it's like, yeah, but I'm like, okay, but you agree. We agree on that, right? I want to just touch on like the common theme of like the cultural aspect of like racism against one another. So I'm Pakistani and I'm Indian. Okay. So I usually say like I'm South Asian in the end, but within those identities, my last name is Patel. So if I'm even going to an interview, for example, and they haven't seen my face, they're like, oh, hi, Fatima. Oh, no, Miriam. No, my name is Rahab. Oh, Patel. I thought you were going to be Hindu. No, I'm Muslim. And then I'll have like my Pakistani counterparts being like, okay, but you're Patel. That's a Hindu last name. And then like my Indian counterparts would be like, but you're Pakistani, that you're not Indian enough for that as well. So a lot of times it's like, okay, but I think my Muslimness is the only uniformed identity that I have that I don't really have to argue against, right? Especially when I wear the hijab. And I think social media has allowed us to connect, but it's also like people are chronically online, and it's like you need to take a deep breath because there are people beyond your screen, like they're human beings. And I think having these conversations that are difficult to have within our communities, like we say the mosques are like collective space for, you know, spirituality, we should be having conversations like that in the mosque as well, right? And I say it like to combat patriarchy, the mosque should be talking about this as well, but everyone's afraid to have these conversations because I don't know if it's about their own politics, their own hierarchies within that, but it is a real threat within the communities of dividing amongst ourselves, whether it's a cultural thing or a religious thing. But these are real issues happening to the audiences that are coming to these mosques, who are going to these imams. And well, if they're not getting answers or support, well, they're going to go online and maybe just take out their anger to the wrong people, right?
Yeah, if you can, I think you should have a 2024 goal, which is to get a mosque to talk about fashion. I think that would be awesome.
One
Getting
day.
people. But it's something we've been saying in a lot of these sessions that, you know, we should learn to post with purpose, and it should be about heart speech, not hate speech. That do take that deep breath before you post, that you don't have to have a visceral reaction to everything that you see or read. Take a step back and think about what you're going to say, and make sure that you're creating a safe space for everyone in your digital community, because that is an extension of your real life community, even if you've never met the person. So that's great advice. We have like 10 minutes ish left. So besides any burning questions, maybe I'll ask one last one to wrap it up. You know, we've talked a lot about joy today, which has been great. And it was interesting hearing, you know, seeing the conversations in our chat as well, that people are feeling challenged and thinking about it deeply. So that's really cool. And I want to keep that going for them as they log off this conversation. And I wondered if you both had thought of something that had brought you joy this week that exemplified, you know, what we've been talking about today.
I'll say something. I think this last month I've been able to talk to so many different people about like my research, and I think having that space has made me like so excited to see like what I can do. Like again, just talking about fashion in general, I think it's so intriguing when I'm not I don't want to talk about modest fashion because we have literature that's there, but that's sorry, I think I talked too much at my fasting throat. But it's just, this is an emerging field, and I get to tell people about how clothing can be celebrated, but it's also really complex. And I've been giving so many different mediums to talk about it with people. And I think that is one of the main things that's bringing me joy, that I have the opportunity. Because again, like in that post 9/11 society, when I was 3 years old and I experienced, like when I was learning about Islamophobia and I was experiencing it, I never imagined myself to be able to do that. I remember in my undergrad when I wanted to do my master's, I had a professor say, yeah, but like Islamophobia is just your experience. It doesn't affect the larger audience. So like I don't know if that would be a good space to do like your master's in. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it anyways because I experienced it. Let me tell people about myself. And it happens to so many more people, and we get to talk about it in different mediums. I get to talk about it through art, fashion. I get to have this community where we get to have these really hard conversations. But again, we can, like when I close my laptop and I'm going to be thinking about some of these comments about these solutions, there's not like a one and done answer, that it's constantly transforming, and which I'm really grateful for.
I'll just kind of talk about what I've been thinking about since it's Ramadan. And I've had non-Muslim coworkers every year that, they ask the same thing, not even water, right? You can't eat for like what, 13, 14 hours. And they're always shook. And just recently I had a coworker say, "Oh, okay, so you just break your fast, you just eat something." I'm like, well, it's not I just eat something. I get to sit down with my family. I can go to the mosque and we can all eat at the same time. We're a Muslim community. So in situations like that where we look forward to eat and break our iftar together, we're putting all of our differences aside, all of our what is a Muslim? This is what Muslims should do. It doesn't matter. At that moment, we're all Muslim. It's sunset time. We all fasted today and we're all breaking fast together. And then having virtual iftars as well for people who cannot go to the mosque, for people who may not be able to break fast with their families for whatever reason, right? They get to do it virtually. So I've really been thinking about that and how joyous of a moment that really is, just sitting down and eating. It's spiritual, it's religious, you feel like you belong. It doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't even matter, like what your Islamic beliefs are, but at that moment, you're Muslim. That really makes me happy.
It's a beautiful moment. I'm gonna pass it on to Nazat, because I'm sorry, Nazat, Zoom must be glitchy or something. I did not see your hand, so I apologize. But hopefully you can give us your comments and wrap it up for us.
Yeah, don't worry about it because I mean, first of all, congratulations to Sana and Rehab on your amazing research, and you have so much to share. I loved it. I loved all of the aspects of what you have learned in your research, but also your personal ideas about all of this. And maybe we need to have another opportunity to talk about this intra-Muslim, discussion because at CCMW, we've always tried to be inclusive and try not to be judgmental, but we're human beings. So sometimes, um, we're always, guided by God and God being the ultimate judge. So sometimes we all the time we have to seek forgiveness for maybe doing something that's not pleasing to God. But the fact is that I agree with you, Rehab. That message that it's between me and God. Please don't judge what I'm wearing, what I look like. I you cannot tell me that I'm Muslim, you're not, and Muslims should be this way or that way. It's, what's so beautiful about Islam? It truly is a faith that um, seeks to connect you, your inner self, to God, you know? And so if that's the case, whether you're doing your prayers, whether you're fasting, it's not for anyone else. It's not to show you I'm a Muslim. It's between me and God and how I'm practicing my faith from my understanding of it. So thank you. I really enjoyed that discussion. And your research is amazing. You'll have other opportunities. Sana's already participated once, but we'll have you back for our Muslim Women Scholar Series. And we have when you're further into your research, um, we'd be happy to have you back. And of course, Fatima, great moderation again. I loved the discussion. It was very, very good. And Akib, thank you for joining us. I love to hear the male voices because it's important for, you're our allies. We can't do this work without you. So please keep joining us. By the way, we do have our wisdom and healing circles, which provide space for us to talk about things that are difficult for us, especially these days. So look out for them. And I think now I'm going to tell you about our next episode of this series. So it's going to be in French. And so if some of you speak French, join us. I think, can we see the slide? Yes, so this one is going to be Comment comprendre l'animosité contre l'islam au Québec. You can probably guess what it says. you know, how to understand the animosity towards Islam in Quebec, because, you know, we've had successive surveys that show that Muslims have a very unfavorable response in Quebec. And so we're going to be talking about that. Our presenters are Professor Denise Elie and Idil Issa. So Denise is a professor and Idil is she's an activist, she's a law student. And so if you're able to join and you do speak French, please join us this Thursday. We are holding it from 10:30 in the morning till noon. And this is our Eastern time. So that's it. Did I miss anything, ladies? Our amazing crew here from CCMW.
No, all good, Nuzhat. Just wanted to say that real applause to everybody who was here today, Fatima, Sana, Rehab, great conversation. And I just feel that although the last one may be really the official finale of our In Conversation series that is funded by the Government of Canada, but I think that this is such an important series where we can be ourselves. There's no pretense, we can just be candid, informal, and just talk about things that are, affecting us, impacting us. And, we have so many questions. I know I do sometimes about our faith, sometimes the discriminations that we experience as Muslims within our faith. So I really love this series, and I'm hoping that, we can take it far and beyond the 7 series that we had planned, but really have it once a month where we come together to talk about mental health and addictions and stigma and all those things that we really seldom do talk about. So I thank our team, Iman and Sulekha, who are working behind the scenes, but they're so integral to this project and to everybody involved, especially Fatima. We had to, who you kind of went to Chicago, came back and did this last series in English for us. So a big thank you to all of you for participating as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, this is not the last time we're all meeting. Inshallah, we'll meet again. And I know many of you are fasting, so may God bless your efforts and may you be rewarded. And inshallah, until next time.
Thank you.
And thank you for those to you and
Thank
the rest of the team too for putting all of these sessions together. They've been wonderful.